I'm going to talk about the difference between restrictive thing modifier clauses and descriptive thing modifier clauses. I think I mentioned this before, but it's a tricky concept, so I want to make sure you understand. So here I have a sentence: Jesus, who was from Nazareth, taught the people that followed Jesus about God. This people that followed Jesus is our explication for disciples. So I'm going to analyze it by clicking on the Analyze button. Okay, so Jesus. Now here, if we hover the mouse over the clause boundary, we see it's a descriptive thing modifier. So that's what we want. And I'm actually surprised it came out right. But if it came out restrictive, we would want to change it to descriptive, and I'll explain the difference in a moment. You could do that by clicking on Features and then clicking on this same place. Who birthplace was, so B birthplace has an estate argument, so the state is where he's from, is Nazareth. Teach about, taught about God is the patient, and the destination is the people he taught. The people, that's routine, that's good. People who followed Jesus. Now, followed always comes out wrong because it assumes that it's the simple version of follow. So I'm going to click on senses, correct that to following the example of. So the disciples are following the example of Jesus. And in order to make my rule work, the expectation requires that they routinely follow Jesus, not just for a moment. So I clicked on features for people, or for follow, and the aspect I made routine. Okay, so now this one, you notice if you hover over here, it's a restrictive thing modifier. Now let's click generate and see what happens. So it's applying all the many rules and takes a long time, doesn't it? Okay, so you see, Jesus, who was from Nazareth, taught his disciples about God. Gee, okay, that showed disciples, but I don't really like that because it doesn't show you the restrictive thing modifier. My bad. Okay, so let's change it to not routine, and then the rule won't work. And generate again. Okay, so I showed you how to make that rule work, that people who routinely followed Jesus became disciples. But then I decided I don't really want that rule because I want to show you what a restrictive thing modifier looks like. Okay, Jesus, who was from Nazareth, taught the people who followed him about God. Okay, that's what I wanted. Now, you note that in the English, the first thing modifier, the descriptive one, has a comma separating it. Commas on the beginning and the end. So Jesus, who was from Nazareth, taught the people, but the second one doesn't. People who followed him about God. And why is that? Well, in the first one, the name Jesus tells you who the person is. So this modifying clause, who was from Nazareth, doesn't define the person Jesus, but it tells you some extra information. So it's descriptive. But in the second case, we have people who followed him, And, there are millions of people. There are people all over the place. There are people who follow him and people who don't follow him. So this is what we call a restrictive clause, and it's narrowing down the particular people to those who follow him. So it's restrictive. It's restricting the interpretation of the word people. And in English, the way we show that is we don't have the commas separating it. So this shows the difference between the descriptive clause, and you can see that here. If you hover over the first one, it says type descriptive thing modifier. It's modifying the object Jesus. And the second clause, put the mouse over there, it says the type is restrictive thing modifier. It's restricting the interpretation of the word people. So that's the difference between restrictive and descriptive